Well, hello. Welcome back to another exciting edition of Coffee with Stephen. So, this week's blog is entitled Torries, Visagoths, and the End of Empires. And it's a longer one. I'm not going to lie to you, like I've been sort of doing over the last couple of blog sessions, but these are interesting times, to say the least. So this is once again a use of the little sort of literary device that I do, where I have a conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Taramina in our officers club, and we're discussing sort of the historical developments of the things that are going on around us. As many of you are well aware, we just had an election in the UK, which resulted in the Tories being swept from power and the Labour Party essentially taking control. We just recently seen the French almost go to a conservative government and then at the last minute have the rug pulled out from under them. But of course, we're all sort of focused on what's going on here in the United States. Now, I talk about the end of empires for a very, very specific reason. There is a lot of historical precedent. Many of us have grown up being told by history books and other sources of misinformation that history is a cyclical phenomenon. Interestingly, I'll just sort of sidebar for a second. St. Augustine, one of the leaders of the Roman Catholic Church in the late 3rd century, wrote a book called The City of God. And he is really the first individual that creates this idea that history is actually a linear narrative. There is a beginning, there's a middle, and then there's an end. Most pagan cultures preceding Christianity, and arguably most pagan cultures even to today, have adopted this cyclical phenomenon, and a lot of political scientists also adopt a cyclical phenomenon. Those who cannot remember history are condemned to repeat it. And there is some truth to that, right? I mean, we certainly see things play themselves out repeatedly again, time and time again. I think probably a better way of looking at this is sort of through a lens of capturing both ideals. There are certain cyclical phenomenons that seem to take place, but the reason they take place is usually what's sort of left out. There's a lot of people who believe that human nature is a sort of a progressive phenomenon, right? I am not so sure. I think human nature arguably stays relatively static, and there's certain basic principles, certain some sort of fundamentals of what human is, and those really don't change. As a result of that, when these human ideals are subjected to political will, there tends to be somewhat of a repetitive format, regardless of who the emperor is or who the polity happens to be. So there is the cyclical phenomenon, even though there is a linear progression in human development. In any event, the end of polities, the end of, empires, the end of republics are somewhat of an inevitable phenomenon throughout human history. And I do believe that we are at an inflection point where we see that there may be the end of this republic that's called the United States. And I don't say that lightly. I also don't think that it's a foregone conclusion, but clearly we're at the edge of the precipice. And that's not an indictment of Joe Biden, nor is it a potential, endorsement of Donald Trump, although I suspect many of you probably already know where my political leanings fall on this. Nonetheless, it's sort of an empirical analysis of where we are right now. And what leads ahead, typically at the end of a republic, is the initiation of empires. And empires are not destined to last 500 years. Sometimes empires last for very brief periods of time. But that always seems to be the inevitable result, and with that, a high degree of authoritarianism and a massive centralization of power. In any event, do encourage you to read the blog, see the conversation that I'm having with my good friend, the Lieutenant Colonel. And as always, train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose. Above all else, stay safe.